10 days now since the earth violently closed in on 6 Utah coal miners. In our fourth story tonight, fading hope for the rescue effort, mounting scrutiny on those running the system that was supposed to protect those men and may have wound up protecting only the people who made money off their sweat. Today, officials said a 5-minute-long sound heard yesterday could have been breaking rock or even an animal. A new hole drilled down to the site turned up oxygen levels sufficient barely to sustain life, if life there is to sustain still. But it is not known whether the 6 men are together or spread out in an area described as being as big as several football fields. If their numbers are added to the government's list of coal mining fatalities, they'll be part of a disturbing trend. Coal mining deaths started to decline in 1926 through administrations, Republican and Democratic. That 80-year decline ended last year when 48 coal miners died, the most in a decade, and the largest percentage increase in 107 years. The man in charge of federal mine safety and of the Utah rescue is Richard Stickler. Stickler is no novice, but his experience does not necessarily reassure. As a mining executive, the mines he ran suffered 3 fatalities and an incident rate that was often twice the national average. As Pennsylvania's mine safety chief, a grand jury investigating the 2002 Q Creek disaster found that his agency should have flagged the problems, later blamed for the flood that trapped those 9 miners there for 77 hours. After a dozen miners died at Sago last year, Stickler declined to endorse proposed new safety rules. 2 miners died in separate incidents the next day. When Mr. Bush nominated him for his current post, he was opposed by the Miners Union, the AFL-CIO, a Sago widow, 8 out of 9 Q Creek miners, congressional Democrats, and enough Republicans that Mr. Bush had to circumvent the Senate entirely to put Mr. Stickler into his current position last year as a recess appointment. Let's turn now to Arianna Huffington, founder of HuffingtonPost.com and author of On Becoming Fearless. Arianna, good evening.
Thank you for having me, Keith.
If even Mr. Bush's own party would not confirm Mr. Stickler when they controlled Congress, how has it happened that the miners' lives are now in his hands?
Well, this is really the question the media should be asking. And Max Vollmer, one of our reporters at the Huffington Post, wrote about that. And the question we've been asking for the last week is, why is Richard Stickler allowed to give press conference after press conference without any media outlet asking him those very questions you're asking tonight? Because clearly this is a man who even Republicans like Senator Alan Spector have opposed publicly his nomination and his appointment in his current job. This is a man with a terrible record, and he's going to oversee the investigation once we know what the fate of the miners is.
Regardless of the laws Congress passes, how much of this comes down to how the agency and who the agency chooses to inspect and to enforce and to punish?
Well, of course, this is a major part of what happens, Keith, and that's why it is so disturbing that we've seen an increase in miners' deaths. Because here we have Bob Murray, who is appearing again day after day at press conferences, and he has been charged with millions of dollars because of the safety violations at his various mines around the country. And he and Stickler are only asked about the rescue. Can't the media cover 2 stories at once, the rescue and the kind of oversight that is really failing at the moment to protect the miners?
Looking at the worst-case scenario, let's stipulate here that the mining industry owns the Bush administration on this front. Even in that context, though, isn't it self-destructive, namely more expensive, to cut back on safety and instead bear the costs of accidents and rescue efforts and retrieval efforts?
Unfortunately, Keith, not necessarily. If you did a purely financial cost-benefit analysis, that would lead to very different conclusions and results than if you took human lives into account. And the idea is that we are a society with a government responsible for protecting human lives, even when it's not the most profitable thing to do. After all, right now in Utah, they're looking for coal at an incredible depth because it's much more profitable to produce more coal now than it was. And the mine is not equipped with the kind of equipment that the legislation passed in 2006 has required, which would have made it much more possible to communicate with the miners. They gave them 3 years to comply with the legislation. Why not give them much less time to comply when lives are at stake?